I'm in long-term recovery from sexual abuse, depression, suicide, and addiction. At the age of nearly 2 years old, my dad was killed in Vietnam and was raised by a single mom along with my older brother, who is approximately 5 years older than me. And around the age of 8 years old, my brother's friend, who is also approximately 5 years older than myself, began the process of sexually abusing me. Really didn't understand what was going on until about the age of 12. And I started having these feelings of sadness and depression and confusion. And at the age of 13, I started going to a little church down the street. And I remember vividly just praying to God to make this stop, to make the abuse stop. I felt nasty. I felt dirty. I tried to tell the perpetrator, the individual, to stop. And I remember him threatening me to tell people that I was gay, or he would threaten to harm my mom or my family. And so I felt like church was my only outlet. And I remember praying and getting saved and just asking God, if you're the God of the universe, you're the God who created the sun, the moon, the stars. You created us. And in doing that, I believe that you can stop this incident, this occurrence from happening, to put an end to the abuse. And it didn't stop. So I lasted in church for about a year. And at the age of 14, as I was getting into junior high, I got out of church. I was just like, God, you're some God to allow this abuse to continue to happen. I blamed God. I was angry. So I quit going to church, and I started isolating. I started pulling away. I didn't want to have any friends. I started indulging in a world of music, and I started collecting all kinds of music. And it was my way, my form of expression, or expressing my thoughts, my feelings through the different styles of music. I had country music. I had rock, heavy metal, Megadeth, AC/DC, Guns N' Roses, Def Leppard, Van Halen, listened to country, that George Jones, Tammy Wynette, Hank Williams Jr. Yet I also listened to some gospel and some other types of music as well. That was my way. If I felt depressed, I would listen to country music. If I felt like upbeat and wanted to party, I'd listen to rock. If I was having a spiritual moment, I would throw on some gospel or bluegrass music. But at the same time, I didn't realize that I was putting myself into a place of hiding. And I remember at an early age, falling on the playground and scraping my knee, and my teacher telling me, not to cry, that I'm a big boy. Big boys don't cry. And I remember my mom telling me if I was crying that, she would say, if you're going to cry, I'm going to give you something to cry about. If you're going to cry, go to your room. So I believe society kind of placed this role or expectation on men that it's not appropriate, that we're sissies or feminine if we express or open up our thoughts or feelings. So from an early age, I was taught, to hide my feelings. And at the age of 16, I got my driver's license, which was a great experience. I think every young person anticipates, getting their driver's license, and I did. I anticipated it. That event, it was a climax in my life, that gave me a sense of freedom, that I had the ability to come and go whenever I chose. So that was a great feeling. And being so involved in music, I became addicted and dependent upon music. So with that, I had to have a massive, nice stereo system to go along with my car. And I remember going camping every weekend with my family at Long's Retreat. And my family would be getting drunk and, just drinking lots of beer. And it was so easy for me because alcohol's legal, for anyone over the age of 21. And with me being underage while I was there camping, it was not too difficult to sneak into the beer. And when I would get drunk, my family, kind of encouraged it because I acted like a madman on alcohol. I mean, I could dance up a rug on alcohol. I acted silly, and so my family started encouraging that behavior by allowing me to drink every weekend. And alcohol was the very first mind-altering substance that I'd ever picked up. And I've always struggled with depression with the loss of my dad, and I saw what the death of my father did to his parents. And my grandmother became an alcoholic, and my grandfather as well, because of the loss of their son. And I remember my mama was always depressed, just crying all the time, calling me at holidays, telling me that my dad's going to be coming home for Christmas or Thanksgiving, and he never would. So the age of 16 for me was kind of a way to break loose and experiment. And the alcohol, I didn't like the feeling afterwards. I would always get severely depressed and then have a hangover the next day. So I eventually started smoking weed and just kind of dabbled with drugs in high school and isolated because I was fearful, about my orientation. I didn't want to be gay. That was not who I wanted to be, yet I was afraid that I might be, so I stayed away from people. I found women to be very attractive. I dated girls and was engaged at one point, and because of my abuse, I didn't have the ability to love her. I did not know how to love her like I should. And the engagement ended up getting broken off. But long story short, I remember being at the WBM fireworks at the age of 18, and a friend of mine gave me a pill while at the WBM fireworks. And I didn't know what it was, thought maybe it could have been an aspirin. I had no clue. And all I remember is when I first took that pill, the fireworks came to life. It was like they turned into monsters, and they were, it was like the fireworks became 3D. And I remember losing control of my emotions. Like I would be hysterically laughing one moment and extremely sobbing the next moment. And I don't know how I made it home, but at the time I had a waterbed, and I remember being in the waterbed, and it was kind of like the effect of going hill hopping in a car. Every time the wave would hit, it would tickle my stomach, and I would just bust out laughing uncontrollably. And I still remember I was living with my mom at the time, and I thought, man, I'm going to wake her up. I couldn't help but to laugh because it was funny. And I went to work the next day, and I remember my coworkers asking me like, man, you look like you have a hangover. And I told them no. I said, I just took the worst trip of my life. I was on a 14-hour high of a roller coaster ride of emotions. It was scary. It was very fearful, lots of anxiety. And I immediately ended our friendship, ended my friendship with my buddy, because I was so angry that he would give me what turned out to be acid. And that was it. I thought I will never touch a drug again. And I remember in 1991, I went to a little tent revival with my buddy Will. He invited me there, and I thought, well, I'm going to sit in the very back because I don't want any preacher coming and grabbing me and taking me to the altar. And I remember sitting in the very, very back of the tent revival, and all of a sudden at the very end, I surrendered. And it was an amazing feeling. I accepted Christ into my life, and it was just like this freedom and this weight lifted from off of me. And I went to Trenton Church of God for a year. Then I ended up going to Stratford Heights in 1992, and I met my wife there, and we ended up getting married in 1994, December 17th, 1994 to be exact. And we just had a lot in common. When we would date, she was very much like me, very shy, very isolated. And it was challenging to our relationship because I had to encourage her to talk a lot. And now that we're married, I can't get her to shut up. We both were involved in ministry, at our different ministries throughout our church. We were youth leaders. We were involved in going to the prayer meetings. I was involved in jail ministry. I sang in the church choir. And we eventually had our son on December 21st, 1997. And then we found out in 1999 we were expecting our second child. And so we were really adamant to locate a house to purchase. And we ended up purchasing our first home in June of 1999, and our daughter was born September 26th, 1999. So it was great. We had our son, Christopher. We had our daughter, Miranda, and it was perfect. We were done. That's all we wanted was just 2 kids. 1 boy, 1 girl is perfect. And we had our home. I had a good job. And then all of a sudden, a tragedy hit our home. In 2004, we experienced our first flood in our partially finished basement. And I remember as I was going down into the basement, I sat on the steps and I just started crying as I saw our furniture submerged in 4 feet of water. All of our appliances were destroyed, TVs floating downstream in our basement. And all I can remember was hearing these voices in my head that kept telling me that I had failed as a father, that I had failed as a husband. And I believed it. I believed it. And I started dropping out of ministry. I became very depressed. And when I get depressed, I do what I do best and what I had always been taught. If I'm going to cry, I'm going to go to my room, or I'm going to cry in silence, or I'm going to cry alone. So that's what I did. I just started crying and believing the lie that I wasn't good enough. The American dream is to get married, buy a home, and have kids, have a job. I had all those things. When we took the paneling off the walls of the basement, we discovered that the foundation was destroyed. I called to check around on estimates. The best quote I got was approximately $30,000 to fix the foundation of our basement, not to refinish it, just to hold the foundation up. It was going to require metal rods. It was also going to need, the house was going to need drainage pipes around the perimeter of the house to pull the water away from the house, just to salvage the foundation. And, you know, I could not go to my church and ask for $30,000. There was just absolutely no way. I knew that we could not come up with that kind of money. So as I continued to isolate and drop out of ministry, I was lucky to even go to church once a month. So I started isolating more, and I started spending a lot of time on my PC computer. And as I was spending time on the computer, this lovely lady pops up on my computer, and I refer to her as Miss Jessica. She pops up on my computer and says, "Hi, check out my site." She was fully clothed. I felt like there was nothing wrong with checking her out. She was gorgeous. She was clothed. It looked innocent until I clicked on her website. When I clicked on her website, it was instant pornography, for which I became instantly addicted. I was like, wow. And once I became addicted to the pornography, it was like I had this Tom and Jerry cartoon experience where I had the angel on one side of my shoulder saying, "Don't do that. Don't do that." And the devil on the other side saying, "Just do it. Just keep doing it." So in order to knock that angel off of my shoulder, I started dabbling in weed. I knew that was a safe substance for me. At least that's what I thought. And I wanted to push that conviction out of my head because my life was completely unraveling. And in 2005, we had another flood in our basement, which once again destroyed all of our appliances. We never refinished the partially finished basement, so there was nothing to fix up. But after the second flood, we had to file bankruptcy. And at that point, we had to also leave our home. We officially became homeless from that point forward. We were homeless for a long time, that we didn't know where we were going to lay our heads, which only added fuel to my self-esteem. I felt horrible. I felt like I lost all connection. I felt like there was nothing that was going to bring me out of this depression or out of this situation. I felt hopeless. I absolutely felt hopeless. So I remember one time we went to the Interfaith Network and we got a voucher to go to a motel. And I'll never forget walking into this motel in Lebanon, and the motel looked like it was something out of a horror film. And it had this light that was dangling with a little string on it. And I looked over at the bed, and the mattress was black. There were cobwebs. You know, it's not that I felt like I was better than anyone else, yet I did not want to subject my kids to living or staying in that environment because I already felt bad enough for losing our home. And I walked out and I started crying. I went out to the car and I looked over to my wife and I said, "We can't stay here. We cannot stay here." And I said, I cannot allow the kids to be subjected to this type of environment. And I remember St. Susanna's Church out of Mason ended up getting us a motel. They fed us. They made sure that we were fed. We did not have any money to buy the kids Christmas gifts. And Lebanon City Schools, the different churches, always made sure that we had food. And that my kids had gifts for Christmas. And they would ask us, my wife and myself, what we wanted for Christmas. And I told them, you know, I would rather you spend the money or the donations on our kids. We're fine. We don't need anything. And Stratford Heights, I cannot say how many times they have helped us with toiletries, food, paying our water bill when we did get a place and we didn't have money. there's just many times that they helped us as well, for which I will be forever grateful. Lots of people that too many to even mention that just came alongside of us to make sure we were fed and nurtured and taken care of. So, however, as we were going from place to place and being homeless, we did finally get into an apartment. And we didn't have the funds to meet the needs of paying our bills. So, long story short, I'll get back to that. But on February 22nd, 2010, all it took was one shot of heroin. To get me back on track. The weed, you see, I started off with smoking weed when I was isolating initially, which led to crack, cocaine, and smoking meth. And eventually someone introduced me to the IV needle, and that's the only way I wanted to use at that point. The high would last longer. It was much more intense. So once I got the needle in me, that's basically the only route I wanted to use to get high. Yet on February 22nd, 2010, one shot of heroin is all it took to make me realize just how sick I was. I will never forget that morning. It was early in the morning, and as I left the individual's house, I was on the interstate, and for the first time in my life, I experienced death. I felt my spirit, I felt this deep sickness, as if my spirit was leaving my body. So I called my wife, and I told her, I said, Nicole, I'm not coming home tonight. I'm not going to be able to make it. And I love you. I'm sorry for everything that I've done. It's never been about you. It's been about me. And I told her, I said, tell the kids that Daddy's not coming home and that I love them. And I started losing my vision while I was driving on the interstate, and I dropped the phone and lost connection. Due to the vision impairment that was taking place, I knew I needed to get off the next exit immediately. So I pulled off the exit and pulled into the nearest gas station. I weighed 130 pounds. And I remember walking in, I thought, if I just get something to drink and a bite to eat, then I'll be okay. Basically, I lived off crackers, cookies, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and Gatorade. Because on meth, I did not want to eat. I had to make myself eat. So when I walked into this gas station, I got me a Gatorade and a Three Musketeer. There were two people in the gas station, a cashier and a young African-American man. And once I got to the cashier, she looked at me, she's like, oh my God, do you need a squad? And as soon as I said yes, I passed out. I woke up to the EMT and these voices came in my head. I was extremely paranoid, frightened, extreme anxiety. And I kept thinking and hearing this voice in my head, oh my God, my entire church, my family, everybody's going to find out that I'm an addict. I went to church high. When I would go to church, which was few and far between, maybe once a month, but when I would go high. No one even knew because I was a functional addict. So at this very moment, when I'm waking up to the EMT in this gas station, I'm thinking, oh my God, everybody's going to find out. So I refused to go to the hospital, had to sign a waiver refusing treatment, and I get in the car. And as soon as I get in my car, I broke down. I knew it was like a spiritual awakening, like they say in the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous. I was having a spiritual awakening. And I remember grabbing a hold of my steering wheel, screaming, I can't do this anymore. I can't. And I started crying out. I started praying. I started asking for forgiveness. I surrendered. And I remember vividly, after praying for forgiveness, immediately after I prayed, the scripture came into my mind. Exodus chapter 17. When the Israelites were in battle against the Amalekites, Moses, Aaron, and Hur were on top of a mountain. And when Moses had his arms lifted up and praised to God, the Israelites would gain ground against the enemy. However, when Moses would get tired and his arms would come down, the enemy would start to gain ground against the Israelites. So Aaron and Hur saw what was happening, and they sat Moses down upon a rock. And Aaron got on one side and lifted the arms of Moses up in the air. And then Hur got on the other side and lifted the other arm up until the Israelites won the battle. That message came to me while I was high on heroin, because the battle of addiction, depression, suicide, it does not belong to us. We do not have to fight this battle by ourselves. We must break the silence so we can get the help that we need. And I remember when I got home early that morning on February 22nd, 2010, I sent a Facebook message to my pastor, and I told him I needed to meet with him ASAP. It was urgent. And I will not forget the first time that I walked into his office and I sat down in the chair and I told him everything, every dark, sick thing I did. And I'm sobbing my eyes out, embarrassed. But yet I broke the silence. And as I was doing that, I also felt a healing beginning to take place. That I didn't have to hide the sickness anymore. That it was actually okay and it felt good to talk about it. I didn't understand because I believed the lie that I had to cry and express my emotions in isolation, yet here I am in my pastor's office and telling him everything and crying and expressing my feelings to another individual, and it was awesome. Yet I didn't understand. I was crying for the shame and the brokenness because I wish people knew me before the drugs. We're not bad people. Yet I will never be the same individual that I was. As I sat in that office, as I was done pouring my heart out, my pastor looked at me and said, "Ron, I love you. I love you, and we're going to get you through this." And I immediately stopped crying, and I looked at him and I said, "How can you love me? How can you sit there and tell me you love me when I just shared all of these nasty things that I did, not just the drugs, but the things that went along with the drugs? How can you tell me?" You see, on drugs, on meth, when I was high, I was a different person. I was like Dr. Jekyll and Dr. Hyde. It was unbelievable. Yet when I walked out of that meeting with my pastor, I felt refreshed, and it was a journey. It was the beginning of my journey, my path to recovery. And I started having a lot of hiccups where I would fall down and go back out and use. And it got to the point that my pastor, along with Cindy Abney, my counselor at church, my Celebrate Recovery minister, Linda Ingham, they finally got to the point and said, "Listen, you're going to have to do more than what you're doing because obviously something's not working." And I remember it got to the point in September of 2010 that I admitted myself into Miami Valley Behavioral Health Unit. I was on the behavioral health unit for 24 hours, and then I was moved to the medical unit. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks, where I was diagnosed with AIDS and hepatitis C. After I was discharged, I went to Turning Point for 30 days. And while I was there, I was starting to feel again, because I had not used drugs while I was in the hospital. I was in the process of my mind clearing up and starting to realize what was going on, that I asked Turning Point if I could stay an extra week when it came time for the conclusion of my treatment. And they did. They let me stay 1 extra week, and I relapsed as soon as I was discharged from Turning Point. I was in transition to intensive outpatient. Due to my diagnosis, comprehensive counseling got me in immediately. Once I got into intensive outpatient, I was able to start doing some work on myself through therapy, individual counseling, and work on my addiction through the intensive outpatient. I became focused on my recovery as opposed to my health. My HIV specialist put me on some medication for my HIV, and I did really well. I completed my intensive outpatient program, and I was doing great. I was going to meetings. I was going to Narcotics Anonymous. I was going to AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. I was going to Celebrate Recovery. So I was building a support network until 2013. In 2013, my HIV specialist informed me that my medications had stopped working. Well, I was nearly 3 years sober, and that was a big blow. That was a hard hit for me. The voices came back in my head once again, that my kids are going to watch me waste away. My wife and family is going to watch me die. And it never dawned on me to use. I did not want to relapse. So the voice that I kept hearing in my head, that it was time to end this battle. It was time to take my life. And that would be the end of my struggles. That I will not have to worry about my illness. I will not have to worry about ever relapsing again. So I believed the voices that I was hearing, and I overdosed. On April 23rd, 2013, I took a whole bottle of my antidepressants. And I was in a coma for 13 days. I died 3 times, where the doctors had to bring me back. I developed pneumonia and acute respiratory distress syndrome. And the thing that bothered me most, I cannot remember taking those pills. Yet all I know that after I overdosed, there's just a blank space that I can't remember everything that happened. And all I can rely on is information from others. And my wife told me the doctors gave her 7 days to pull me off the vent. The doctors put me inside what's called a rotoprone bed that rotates you to alleviate the pneumonia and acute respiratory distress syndrome. The doctors had no hope in my survival, yet the doctors thought that maybe this bed might help at least with the pneumonia and the acute respiratory distress syndrome. And the doctors told my wife, my pastor, my family, that he's not going to make it. My liver was shutting down, my kidneys were shutting down, and my wife was on a time limit. Within 7 days, she was going to have to make a decision to take me off the vent or to leave me in a vegetative state, as the doctors thought. Those were the only two options. So as the time drew near to make the decision to take me off the vent, my wife was up all night praying and fasting on a Saturday, and she went to church Sunday morning, and she told me, she said, Ron, I was in the church and Kathy Turner sang, He's an on-time God. And I knew that that was confirmation that everything was going to be okay. So she had been staying at the hospital with me nearly every night, and she decided Sunday she would stay home. And she went to the hospital on Monday. And when she got to the hospital, the doctor looked at her and said, Mrs. Ward, we have no idea what's going on. Yet all of a sudden, your husband's vitals they're improving. So we're going to give you an extension. So they left me on the vent, and eventually I did come out of the coma. I could hear people talking. I remember two individuals specifically. One was my brother, who said if I was to get better, that he would go to church with me. And there was another individual, but I could not think of the guy's name. So I was talking this over with a buddy of mine, John Hawthorne. I was telling, he's my sponsor as well. And I was telling him, I was like, John, there was someone else in that room that told me they would go to church with me if I got better. And John said, Ron, I was right there. He said, that was Billy Short's brother-in-law, Jason. And he said, I was right there when he said it. So it was validation and confirmation that I could hear two people talking. So eventually, like I said, I did come out of the coma and I was discharged from the hospital on May 14th, 2013. And my Celebrate Recovery minister came up to me. She said, you are absolutely not doing anything for 2 months. She said, in 2 months, I want you to work on a project, and I will let you know what that is. So in that 2-month time frame, I had been praying and fasting. And when she came to me and gave me the project, she told me, she said, Ron, I want you to put an event together for SAMHSA, Substance Abuse, Mental Health Services Association. I want you to put this event together for National Recovery Month. And it was like the Holy Spirit spoke, celebrating restoration. You see, Celebrate Recovery is a 12-step faith-based program that is a process of recovery to bring us to a place of restoration. And God spoke that to me, that I, along with our communities, is going to experience a healing. And today I can say that I have been healed of hepatitis C, and I also believe that I am going to be cured of HIV. I am proclaiming that. I'm believing that. I just expect that. I am going to receive that healing. So we held our very first event in September of 2013 for National Recovery Month at Miami University Middletown campus. So that is pretty much my story in a nutshell. Yet my personal mission is to motivate, educate, and inspire hope to the hopeless. And I want to reiterate, no matter what you're going through in life, whether it's depression, verbal, physical, sexual abuse, or you're struggling with mental illness or some type of substance abuse issue, whatever the need is, whatever you're struggling with, Do not be ashamed to break the silence, because you do not have to fight this fight alone. Celebrating Restoration has a very comprehensive website. We have resources for teenagers. We have resources that allow the communities to go on there and get educated. We have an education center on depression, suicide, mental illness, HIV, Hep C. And if you are using needles or having promiscuous sex, I encourage you to be tested for HIV and Hep C or any other communicable diseases. That's very important. And I encourage you to check out our website. We also have a lot of resources regarding treatment, faith-based and non-faith-based. Every individual is unique. What treatment center might work for one may not work for the next individual. And also the important part, and I'll leave you with this, is to build up a recovery support network. I would not be where I'm at today, over 2 years sober, without my support network. I have accountability partners that I can call. Living life on life's terms is very challenging. Yet the only way I can do that and cope, I can cope without the dope today through prayer, through my church, through the reading of God's Word, and through going to meetings. I continue to go to meetings such as NAAA and Celebrate Recovery. There's also Smart Recovery for those who are not of the faith. There's something out there for everyone. And I just want to thank you for allowing me to take the time to share my story. Thank you so much.